Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. We had a most unnerving accident here today. Eileen Burton, one of the infants, tripped over her own trailing shoelace and fell like a log onto the metal milk crate. She hit her forehead on the sharp edge, concussing herself and getting a horrible gash along the right eyebrow. Joseph Coggs, who once before, when Miss Clare was taken ill, was a harbinger of woeful tidings, was sent in to tell me of the catastrophe. "Eileen Burton's busted her head," was his greeting, and as I hastened to the next room, I heard him say with relish to my round-eyed class, "Her's probably dead." You could have heard a pin drop in the infant's room. Miss Clare was mopping the child's head with a swab of damp cotton wool. It was obvious that she would need stitches in the gash, and we must get her to hospital. "I'll get the car out and take her straight to Caxley if you can manage both classes," I said. "Mr. Roberts may not have gone to market yet," said Miss Clare, looking up at the big wall clock. "Do you think he'd help?" "Mr. Roberts farms next door to the school and is one of the school's managers, and always a tower of strength. I sent a message over to the farm by Patrick and returned to Eileen, still prostrate on the floor, but now with a cushion under her head and a rug over her from the schoolhouse. My class surged ghoulishly in the partition doorway and were dispatched to their desks with hard words and threats of no play for nuisances. Eileen began to come round as Patrick returned. "Mr. Roberts has gone, and Mrs. Roberts too, so Jim's dad said." He nodded to Jim in the back row. "But he says if you wants a stretcher, he's got a hurdle he can send over." It was quite apparent that word would already have flown round the village grapevine that Eileen Burton, and probably a couple of more, were lying with every limb broken and at the point of death in Fairacre School. "I must get a message to her mother," I said hastily, "before I take her into Caxley." "She's back at the fish shop," chorused the children. "Sutton's, miss, at Caxley, miss. You'd see her there, miss. Market day, she's bound to be there, miss," continued the helpful babble. I quelled them with that daunting glance which every teacher worth her salt keeps in her armory, and when peace was restored, I helped Miss Clare to fasten the bandage round Eileen's head. She had a drink of water and looked a little better. At last we propped her gently in the car and gave my children last-minute admonitions about helping Miss Clare before setting off for the outpatients department of Caxley Hospital. I did not feel at all happy about leaving Miss Clare, for the shock had obviously upset her, and I hoped that the extra children would not be too much for her. On the other hand, I told myself as we drove past Beech Green School, how fortunate that there was another teacher to leave in charge. If Fairacre had had a one-teacher school, as so many villages have, what would have happened in a case like this? Either the child must have been given second-best treatment on the spot, or the services of a kindly neighbor with a car enlisted, as we had hoped to do when we appealed to Mr. Roberts, with the possibility of no one being available. Otherwise, the school must have been dismissed while the patient was taken to hospital, or the children given work to do without supervision. Both most unsatisfactory arrangements. A telephone call to the hospital would have been the other alternative, but there are many schools without this service, and the time taken to send the message and to wait for the ambulance to arrive might be considerable. No, I decided as I drew up at Sutton's fish shop to break the news to Mrs. Burton, and to take her with us if possible, I was very glad I did not have to face all these hazards alone, as so many country head teachers are obliged to do. May has ended with a cold, gusty day, which has shivered the young elm leaves and whipped the windows with little whirlwinds of upflung dust, twigs, and straws. During afternoon playtime, a vicious hailstorm sent the children scurrying into school for shelter. It fell heavily, looking like slanting rods of steel, and the playground and adjoining churchyard were quickly white. From the schoolroom window I could see Mr. Willett, who had been trimming the grass paths, sheltering from the storm in the church porch. He had folded the sack on which he had been kneeling to make a hood to shelter his head and shoulders from the onslaught which had overtaken him. and as he stood there with his rough brown hood and his drab trousers bound round the legs to stop them flapping, he might have been a figure from any century. So must his forefathers have often stood, from Norman times on, dressed in sober, serviceable cloth, waiting patiently for the weather to clear, gnarled old hands nursing elbows and long-sighted eyes fixed on the sky above the massive walls of their church. June. The Whitsun and half-term holiday combined gave Fairacre School almost a week's break, which I spent most agreeably at Cambridge with an old college friend. The backs, enchanting at any time and season, seemed lovelier than ever, and even song at King's College Chapel exerted the same magic as it did on my first visit with the same friend many years ago. What a hauntingly lovely place Cambridge is. It has a gentleness, an ambiance, a wistful elegance that is unique. A visit to London or Oxford or any other great and ancient city for that matter exhilarates and stimulates me, but Cambridge always gives something more, so deeply stirring that I could not dismiss it simply as nostalgia for my long-lost youth. Tentative questioning of other people has confirmed my suspicions that Cambridge has a quality compounded of great skies, shimmering willows and water, ephemeral youth in age-old buildings, and the loneliness of its setting in desolate fens, which evokes a strangely powerful response from those who walk her ways. The train journey back to Caxley was a tedious cross-country affair lasting over 3 hours. Luckily, Mr. and Mrs. Annett were shopping near the station and gave me a lift to Fairacre so that I did not have to wait another hour for the local bus. The schoolhouse was unnaturally quiet when the sound of the Annett's car had died away. I prowled round, savoring the joys of the newly returned. The clock had stopped at 4:20. The house was flowerless, and in the kitchen the dishcloth hung dry and stiff, arched over the edge of the sink like a miniature canvas tunnel. I put the kettle on for that first inspiring cup of tea and resumed my prowling upstairs. Tibby, curled up comfortably in a patch of sunlight on my eiderdown, stretched out luxuriously, all claws extended, gave a welcoming yowl, half yawn, half mew, and resumed his interrupted slumbers again. Mrs. Pringle had been detailed to feed the cat, and when I returned to my singing kettle, I noticed that every morsel of food had been used. As I had left an imposing variety of delicacies, including cold meat, cold fish, dried cat food, 2 tins of another variety much appreciated by Tibby, as well as a half-pint of milk daily, my companion had obviously been living like a lord, and I could see that I should have the unenviable job of restoring him to a more humble way of life. With all the windows in the house opened, I sat down with my tea tray and thought how lovely it was to be back. I felt like a sword in a scabbard, I told myself, and instantly decided that a sword was much too dashing. Perhaps a cup hanging again on its accustomed hook in the kitchen dresser would be a better simile. At any rate, to be a village schoolmistress with a fine border of pinks just breaking before me and the sound of rooks cawing overhead seemed very right and proper, and I envied no man. The second half of the term started in a blaze of sunshine. Yesterday the temperature was up in the 80s, and we had the schoolroom door propped open with the biggest upturned flower pot that Mr. Willett could find. The green paint on the doors and windows of Fairacre School has long since faded to a soft silvery green, like a cabbage leaf with a fine bloom on it. It is a most beautiful color, and I regret that we are due to be repainted in the summer holidays. The managers have not decided on the new color, I hear, but Mr. Willett tells me that Mr. Roberts the farmer favors a deep beetroot, Colonel Wesley a sensible chocolate, and the vicar is pressing for green once again. I am doing a little subtle propaganda each time I see the vicar and supporting his claim as the least objectionable of the 3 colors. The children spend their playtime and dinner hour in the shade of the elm trees at the corner of the playground. The heat thrown up from our poorly asphalted playground is unbelievable, and the 2 buckets of drinking water which Mr. Willett carries over from my kitchen daily have been increased to 3. The distant clatter and hum of Mr. Roberts' grass cutter at work is a real high summer sound, and while the children loll in their desks, fidgeting as the backs of their knees stick uncomfortably to the edge of their wooden seats, they can hear the swifts screaming as they flash by St. Patrick's spire next door, and the drone of a captive bee who has blundered through the Gothic window. The flowers have burst into bloom in this heat, and the cottage gardens blaze with irises, lilies, cornflowers, and peonies. Miss Clare brought a bunch with her white jasmine to the infants' room, and Jimmy Waits brought me a bouquet of roses. But it is a pity to pick these lovely things while the weather is so phenomenally hot, for they dropped in a day. I've never seen the elder bushes so covered in flowers, and until this year had never realized what beautiful trees they are, with their hundreds of floating white faces, all tilted at the same angle, each composed of a myriad tiny flowers, each flower having 5 petals starwise, with 5 golden stamens projecting above and looking like a tremblant piece of jewelry. The bushes in this summer heat are dazzling. Their luminous quality, compounded of their massed moons against young green leaves, which Sir Alfred Munnings has caught so brilliantly in paint, has never struck me so forcibly as during this vivid spell of weather. The road through Fairacre, which the Rural District Council saw fit to tar and gravel a few weeks ago, much to the joy of the school children, who arrived late because we was helping the steamroller man, is now a sticky black mess which is ruinous to shoes and is driving all the dogs in the neighborhood mad as the tar squelches between their paws. Last night, as I returned from taking Miss Clare some gooseberries, I rounded the sharp corner into the village and nearly ran down Joseph Coggs and his 2 little sisters, who were squatting in the middle of the road, popping tar bubbles with leisurely forefingers. The car screeched to an abrupt stop, and I lashed the amazed trio with my tongue. Joseph was as shaken as I was, and inclined to be tearful. "We wasn't doing no harm," he faltered, under lip quivering. "You wasn't doing no good either," I retorted wrathfully, letting the handbrake go, and it wasn't until I had changed into 3rd gear and was cooling down slightly that my ungrammatical echo burst fully upon me. Amy spent summer afternoon and evening with me, as James had been called away on a mysterious errand connected with the firm's business, which necessitated absence from home for the whole of the weekend. As we sat in the shade of the apple trees, topping and tailing gooseberries for bottling, Amy surprised me by asking, "Tell me, what do you do with your time when you're not in school?" "Why, this sort of thing," I replied, holding up a whiskery giant. "I have to do all the things that other women do, I suppose. I wash my clothes and iron them, and bake cakes and mend things, and fetch in coal and clean the windows." I could have continued the list indefinitely, but I could see that was not really what Amy wanted to know. How did I use my leisure, and more particularly, was I happy here, living alone, a solitary woman, exposed to the interested gaze of my village neighbors, and with virtually no private life of my own? Did I ever crave for city pleasures, for crowds, for shops, for excitement? Would I like to change my way of life? Wasn't I in danger of becoming a vegetable? I don't know whether Amy believed me when I answered truthfully that I was completely happy, for single women living alone like me, and there are thousands of us up and down the country, are often the subject of pity and speculation. Amy had voiced the unspoken queries of many married people that I knew. Amy said sternly that with the world in the state it was, and the misery that surrounds us on every side, she was surprised to hear me say that I was happy. To which Jeremiad I replied sturdily that I knew just as much about the world's miseries as she did, but still remained incorrigibly content, and that nobody would find me apologetic for being so. "But don't you feel you ought to be more ambitious?" persisted Amy, slightly nettled. "Do you want to do nothing better than to be schoolmistress at Fairacre School?" "It suits me," I said equably. Amy said, "Tchah," which I'd always hoped to hear somebody say one day, and flicked tops and tails off with a vicious snapping of scissors. I was mildly sorry that I had riled her, but I thought over our conversation when she had departed in the glorious car, and came to the conclusion that we should never see things in the same light. For Amy is the victim of today's common malaise, too much self-analysis, while I, finding myself remarkably uninteresting, am only too pleased to observe others and the natural objects around me. Thus I am spared the pangs of self-reproach, and, as my lot is cast in pleasant places, find endless cause for happiness and amusement. One of Mr. Roberts' calves strayed into the garden last night. The only damage it did was to lean heavily against a wooden post which supports a rose tree while it scratched its back, leaving the post at a sad angle. Mr. Willett and I put it straight during playtime. I held it nervously while Mr. Willett, perched on a kitchen chair, smote it mightily on the top with a mallet. At every massive shudder I expected either to have my hand mangled or for Mr. Willett to crash through the chair seat. But luck was with us. "There," he said at length, surveying his handiwork from aloft. He suddenly caught sight of someone in the lane, invisible to me on my lower plane. "Now who might that be?" he pondered, eyes screwed up against the sun. "The vicar?" I hazarded, picking a few pinks. Mr. Willett was applying all the fierce concentration of a villager confronted with a stranger. "Nope, this chap's got a new Panama hat on." "Mr. Roberts?" "No, I knows he," Mr. Willett said testily. Silence fell. I picked a few more pinks, while Mr. Willett remained rooted to the kitchen chair. "Must be a gentleman," observed Mr. Willett. "Blows his nose on a handkerchief." I found this social nicety very interesting, but did not like to pursue it further. "He's coming this way," continued my lookout. "Why," his voice fell an octave with disappointment, "it's only that chap Maughan." He checked suddenly and added hastily, "But there, I expect you'll be pleased to see him. You run along, miss. I'll put the chair back. You don't want to keep him waiting." Mr. Maughan had called to see if I would go with him to the Caxley Orchestral Society's concert next week. He has tickets for Wednesday's evening performance, and I have offered to drive him in. The Annetts and other friends will be playing, and it should be a very pleasant evening. Exactly 20 minutes after accepting Mr. Maughan's invitation, Mrs. Pringle arrived with a basket full of cleaning rags to store in her special cupboard in the lobby. She gave me an alarmingly coy smirk. "Enjoy yourself on Wednesday," said Mrs. Pringle. So much for Fairacre's efficient bush telegraph. Miss Clare, Mr. Willett, and I were gossiping in the empty classroom after school today. Mr. Willett was sitting on the old desk against the side wall. "See this?" he said to Miss Clare. She went over and peered down at the desk where his horny forefinger was pressed. There, carved in the ribby top, were the letters AGW. "Alfred George Willett," said the owner with pride. "Done 'em in poetry once. Chipped away careful under my book. We was supposed to be learning some bit about Westminster Bridge with a dull old soul passing by. Old Hope, he was a great one for poetry, wasn't he?" Miss Clare, who was a few years older than Mr. Willett, agreed. She was a pupil teacher in the same infant's room when Mr. Hope was headmaster at Fairacre. I have heard many tales of this interesting man who used to live in the house I now occupy. He was village schoolmaster for several years. His life was tragic, for his only child, Harriet, died at the age of 12, his wife fell ill, and he became addicted to drink. Soon after the First World War, he left Fairacre and took a post in the north. He wrote verse himself, and his pupils were set inordinate amounts of poetry to learn weekly. I have often heard the older people in Fairacre tell of his powers of storytelling, and his pupils produced a play by Shakespeare annually in the vicarage garden, no mean accomplishment in a small, unbookish village. I should like to have known Mr. Hope, that sad, gifted man, whose small, nervous handwriting fills so many pages in an earlier school logbook in my desk drawer. He was much thought of, but he was not beloved. As far as I can gather from latter-day comments, he was feared by many of his pupils and looked upon as a crank by their parents. One rarely hears of pity for him, which seems strange to me. I was interested to hear Miss Clare and Mr. Willett exchange memories as they surveyed the youthful Willett's handiwork of many years ago. "Fine old temper he had," observed Mr. Willett. "Out in the lobby, boy," he shouted at me when he saw this, and out I went and touched my toes and got 6. "You wants to try a bit more of that, miss," he added in a half-jocular way that did not cloak his inner belief in the adequacy of Mr. Hope's methods. Miss Clare shook her white head slowly. "There was too much of it, Alfred," she said gravely. "You bigger boys treated that far too frequent caning as a huge joke. You had to, otherwise you were afraid your companions would think you cowardly. In fact, it had 2 bad effects. Its frequency undermined Mr. Hope's authority in the end. I'm sure that was one of the reasons that took him so often to the Beetle. And secondly, the little ones in my room were terrified of him. They heard the shoutings and the canings, and I know for a fact that they dreaded him coming into the infants' room." "I don't think they minded that much," said Mr. Willett. "We was all used to a tight rein then, big and little. Remember how we used to sit on these forms with no backs to rest against? Got spoke to pretty sharp, too, if we sagged a bit." "It was quite wrong," said Miss Clare firmly, "to expect children to sit as they did then. And as for folding their arms across their backs, well, I told Mr. Hope flatly that I would not train the babies to sit so. It was one of the few things I did have words about. Mostly he was very reasonable and helped me a great deal with the preparation of lessons." "Never made no friends, did he?" mused Mr. Willett, fingering his stained mustache. "Looked down on us working class and tried to keep in with the gentry too much." "Oh, come," protested Miss Clare. "I'm sure he didn't look down on anyone. He found his home and family and the schoolhouse garden and his books and poetry filled his free time. As for the gentry, don't forget that those he had dealings with were his school managers, and it was necessary to see quite a bit of them as a matter of school routine. No, you're quite unfair to Mr. Hope." Mr. Willett lumbered off the desk lid that set so many far-off things stirring, and unconsciously summed up the enigma of Mr. Hope. "Fact is, I never understood the chap. He was a fish out of water in Fairacre, and to us folks, well, he smelt a bit odd." We will journey further into June next time.